There's a rumour knocking about the paddock that Valtteri Bottas could return to Mercedes as a reserve driver this time, and he was asked about it. This is what he had to say.
Priority is to stay as a race driver. That's what I want. That's what we're pushing for with Mattia. As I don't have anything signed, we are in October. I gotta look at all the alternatives, including going back to Mercedes family. That's for sure one option, and I would consider it. There's other options as well.
That sounds like confirmation to me that it is at least an option that's on the table. Question is it the right one? Well, my name's Tommo. Let's talk about it. Sabar are possibly looking for something new, right? Which kind of does make sense because they're getting Nico Hülkenberg, right? Who's one of the most experienced drivers in Formula 1, whose stock is incredibly high at the moment as well. He's a known entity in these ground effect cars. Do you really need another driver that ticks many of those boxes? Valtteri's very experienced. He's won a bunch of races as well. Nico's never even got a podium, right? He's proven, but is he proven in ground effect? He's been at Sauber. He was very good at the start of 2022. Valtteri was putting in point scoring positions pretty consistently. So you could argue that he is a known entity in ground effect. It's just that the car's been rubbish. But do you need two drivers that fit that bill? You can use Nico to steer the ship, and then the other seat can go to a younger, more exciting prospect that you can build and develop as part of that Audi works team from 2026 onwards, right? This is a huge project for them, and they're going to want a big title name. They've got Nico Hülkenberg, who fits the experience. He's German as well, which helps. Is Valtteri that big, high ceiling prospect? No. So I do kind of get why Sauber seem to be considering options outside of Valtteri more than him. But look, another argument against Valtteri really is that car development has moved backwards since he joined that team. Because you've got to remember that 2022 Sauber, yes, it started the ground effect era well, but Valtteri wasn't involved in the build of that car at the start because that was their legacy build from 2021, working on the new set of regulations when Valtteri was still at Mercedes. So you can't really credit Valtteri with any of that early 2022 performance. He delivered performance in the car, but I'm talking about a driver's responsibility as someone who helps push development of the car and put the team on the right direction and give good feedback, all of that. Well, since the middle of 2022, that Sauber has stunk gradually more and more and more. Maybe it is harsh, maybe it's not true, but it does feel like you can make a compelling argument to suggest that he hasn't been the leader that Sauber needed during that time. Yes, of course, he's not an aerodynamicist, he's not the chief technical officer. Okay, that's not ultimately his responsibility, but the drivers do play a crucial component in steering the development of the car. Now again, whether or not Valtteri has held up his end of the bargain, Mattia Binotto has come in and has to analyse what's going on. It's not been working in this ground effect era, and Valtteri's been part of that team. So is it sensible for them to consider, well, actually maybe Valtteri is part of the problem? He might not be, but he might. So let's just try someone new, someone young, someone exciting, someone who's a potential prospect for the future. Maybe it would be even worse if they had two Zhou Guanyus, maybe it would be even worse. But we don't know. And Binotto's got to make his best guess, I suppose. Look, Valtteri has said it himself. It's October now and he's still got nothing confirmed for next season. He needs to consider his options for employment in 2025, right? His preferred option is to stay at Sauber, but that is the seemingly main option that is ultimately out of his hands. He's put an offer in and it's up to Sauber whether they accept that or not. So then outside of Sauber and outside as well of this Mercedes reserve option that seems to be on the table, well, where could he go? I mean, in terms of racing series, the two most clear and obvious ones that you would immediately go to are, well, first of all, World Endurance Championship. Many an ex-F1 driver has moved over to World Endurance, and especially drivers who haven't had a great time in F1 and really rebuilt and re-established their top-tier performance in WEC. Think Brendan Hartley, Sebastian Buemi, Daniel Kvyat, and more recently, Antonio Giovinazzi. Do we know of an option there for Valtteri? We don't, but I would be very surprised if a 10-time race winner of Valtteri's experience in Formula 1 and the high profile that he is wouldn't attract attention, especially as WEC is building out. You've got Hyundai now soon to be joining. I'm not sure if that's 25 or 26. Manufacturers are really putting their all. If they can't get into F1, they're going to World Endurance. Then, of course, there's IndyCar. Many an ex-F1 driver, Romain Grosjean, Marcus Ericsson, Alex Rossi has had careers in Formula 1 to varying degrees of success. Grosjean got a few podiums and moved over to stateside and held a pretty good account of themselves, particularly Marcus Ericsson. I think he really did. His career was in the absolute dirt after Charles slapped him up in F1. And, well, he's almost been a two-time Indy 500 winner. I mean, Bottas would be the most successful F1 driver to move to IndyCar if he did. Probably since Nigel Mansell, I want to say. Let me know in the comments below if there's anyone I'm missing, but I feel like Mansell, I think Fittipaldi was probably the most successful, then Mansell. Then it'd probably be Bottas if he was to move. Either way, I think that would bring a lot of eyeballs, a lot more attention to IndyCar, which deserves more attention because it's quality. And you know what? I'm going to chuck in another left field shout for an option for Valtteri for next season onwards. Supercars. The old V8 supercars, that is, in Australia, the premier Australian, well, not just Australian, New Zealand as well, of course, touring car series. Of course, Valtteri has very much embraced his new Australian identity. His Mrs. Tiffany Cromwell is an Australian professional cyclist, and maybe if, want to settle down in Australia, Valtteri can live out a bit more motorsport career racing in V8 supercars. That would bring a lot of eyeballs onto that series as well. Maybe Daniel Ricciardo will find himself in there at some point racing against Bottas, just like they did in the junior formulas. Hey, memories. Sitting on the sidelines for a year, embedding yourself into that team with a lot of goodwill about you and helping them steady the ship. I'm not talking about Bottas for Mercedes in 25. I'm talking about Alex Albon for Red Bull in 2020. That's exactly what he did. He kept his presence within the paddock and he kept his stock relatively high amongst the people who mattered, right? Not fans on Twitter, the people who actually mattered. Jos Capito gave him the opportunity. He's been able to recover his F1 stock ever since. Could Valtteri do the same? I know he's a lot older than Alex, of course, but Valtteri will still be 36 by the time the 2026 season starts. So if he had a year out in 25, came back in 26, he'd be 36 by the time the season starts, which is, it's Lewis is going into his 40s, Fernando's well into his 40s. He could do it if he really wanted to. And also, I think Valtteri would be departing at the end of this year if he doesn't get a seat for next season with more goodwill than Alex had after his 2020, because Valtteri has, you can argue, he's done all that he can do in a really bad car and he's consistently beat his teammate. More can you ask of him? Whereas Alex had just come off of a season of absolutely getting slam dunked by Max Verstappen. I absolutely believe that most people see more ability in Valtteri right now than they did in Alex in 2020. Not to mention the 10 race wins and all the experience that comes with that. I think that makes Valtteri a pretty valuable commodity in the market, just not right now. Look, maybe this is a nice little stopgap for Valtteri. He's not had a year off since his F1 career started at Williams in 2013. You can sit on the sidelines, see how this season pans out and see how all of these new drivers, all of these young rookies that are getting blooded in almost at the same time, how they perform, right? Because for every Franco Colapinto, right, who has jumped in and done really well, you get a Logan Sargent. You've got Antonelli at Mercedes, Doohan at Alpine, Ollie Behrman at Haas, maybe Hadjar at Racing Bulls if Checo gets dropped and Lawson gets promoted. There's no guarantee all of these drivers will just settle right in and do a really good job. And Valtteri can make himself a really, really good fallback option because a lot of these teams are taking, gambles, which I'm glad they are. And I think they absolutely should be. And having a commodity like Bottas on the sideline, say Alpine, for example, say Doohan just doesn't live up to the hype and he's getting beaten week in, week out by Pierre Gasly. I think Valtteri would be a really appealing prospect. Bottas and Gasly for Alpine 2026 onwards. I'm not writing Doohan off by any stretch. I'm just giving a potential example of how things could go. It only takes one team to need him and it's a slot in, right? And again, if he's keeping himself within that paddock, he can keep talking to these people. It's a traveling circus. Everyone travels together. He can keep himself front and center in the right people's minds. And as for Mercedes, look, they know they're in a pickle right now. Like, the variation in their performance week in, week out, session by session, tyre compound by tyre compound is crazy. And Lewis is really, you can tell it's really grinding him down. And I'm glad this isn't just how his career's ending. I'm glad he's going to get to go to Ferrari and potentially have a really nice, exciting end to his career. If this was how it was ending for Lewis at Mercedes, with no option to leave, that would be a crying shame. But that's the thing, they're going through all these car troubles, yet they're losing Lewis, who is their most experienced, the most successful F1 driver of all time, and bringing in a rookie. Like, rookies can be quick, but one thing they definitely don't have is experience, and that feedback and that ability to be able to steer car development and assist from that point of view. That comes with time, and George has got time and is settled in now, but you're losing such a big, valuable source of feedback in Lewis Hamilton. Bringing in Kimi Antonelli is going to leave a bit of a gap there, and that's a gap that potentially Valtteri Bottas as a reserve driver can plug, because he can help out Kimi, he can help out George, he can do sim work, he can do reserve work in the background. He can be what Alex was to Red Bull in 2020 to Mercedes in 2025. Look, it's easy to forget how good and consistent Bottas was, apart from in 2021, really. But even then, he still helped deliver Mercedes the Constructors' title, even though Lewis was outscored by Max in the end. Never missed a Q3 in 5 seasons of that team. Outqualified Lewis about 30% of the time, just under 1 in 3. Like, that's huge against arguably the greatest driver of all time in Lewis Hamilton, right? Valtteri in that Mercedes team was not a mug. They could rely on Bottas picking up the pieces and coming in right behind Lewis, whereas Red Bull have never been able to rely on Checo for any elongated period of time to do that. Valtteri's got a great relationship with Toto. He seems very unproblematic in terms of relationship with drivers. He's not going to ruffle any feathers, and if George and Kimi were to have to miss a race for whatever reason, I think he'd be a very, very capable stand-in to do the job and help push that team forward, because that's what that team needs right now. And then, of course, there is this new generation Valtteri. We never really saw this guy at Mercedes, but he's really come out of his shell since moving away from Mercedes, and I don't think he'd lose that by going back. I still think he'd bring, you know, bum out, mullet on, good energy. I think it'd be really cool to see Valtteri return to that environment just as more of himself, and again, he wouldn't have a full-time race seat, so that takes that ultimate burden of pressure and the 1-year revolving contracts that never really seem to work for him kind of mentally. Great for the social media team as well at Mercedes. They would have a field day. If Valtteri doesn't get a seat at Sabar, which of course has to be his priority, then I think Mercedes reserve role is absolutely the right role for him. I can't think of another one that helps elongate his F1 career and gives him a chance for a 2026 seat more than a reserve role at Mercedes. But let me know your thoughts and feelings in the comments down below. Drop a like on this video if you did enjoy it. My name's Tomo. Thanks again. Have a good one.